is that when we talk about tough conversations, the work isn't about making tough conversations easy. The work is about making tough conversations more effective. And that is the work here. I think we go into these, we're gonna do crucial conversations, or we're gonna do this particular thing or that particular thing in hopes that it removes the discomfort that comes from having tough conversations. And the thing is that tough conversations are just tough. And that's why a lot of us avoid them. And so the hope is that we can give you a bit of an on-ramp into having these tough conversations. It's not that people are having tough conversations and they're going bad. People just aren't having them. And so hopefully we are going to give you a little bit of an on-ramp to help move into that space. So when it comes to tough conversations, we want to name that an effective tough conversation, making a tough conversation effective, happens long before that conversation is ever happening. So making a tough conversation effective happens long before we are ever in dialogue around a tough issue or having that tough conversation. It is about the type of culture and environment that we foster within our organizations and within our relationships within our organizations. And so today we want to name 3 mindsets that really help cultivate an environment where we can have better, more effective, tough conversations. And we're going to spend more time at one particular. So the first thing, and we can go ahead and just click things through here, Greg, but the first one is appreciation. The second one is empathy. And the third is the very thing that we are going to talk about today, which is the it factor. We all have got the capacity to have the it factor. So we know that tough conversations go so much more effective when they are had in an environment where people feel, if we go back to this appreciation one, where people feel seen, where people feel like their effort, their energy matters. And what we know about appreciation is that appreciation is better when it's more specific and when it's more frequent. So the consistency with which we acknowledge each other is the foundation of creating a culture where that is part of the fabric, and that has a knock-on implication for having better, tough conversations. And empathy. Empathy, if you look at any leadership research right now, it is oozing with studies about empathy, because we are realizing how vital empathy is to our ability to connect with and work with others in really efficient, effective ways. And so the ability to be appreciated, but also understood, which doesn't necessarily always mean agreeing, but understood as part of your mindset in your environment is huge. So now onto the it factor.
Well, what I want to say as we make this pivot is that oftentimes we want to fast track these tough conversations, and we want to avoid the first 2. I hear this all the time. If we could just take emotion out of this, right? Which is, when you're having tough conversations, it's a relational dynamic. Like, we cannot take all of the relationship out of it. And as Abbey has pointed so beautifully to, like, these things, the opportunity for a good tough conversation happens and builds over time with regular appreciation, and by using this skill of empathy, which is not a soft skill. This is a very challenging skill to develop and use, but it is one that the research shows that we can grow. And when we do, it can be really powerful in how we lead and how we run organizations. So the third one we want to talk about is the it factor. What we mean by that is, I'll just click over to this next slide, is that, in our tough conversations, it's a relational dynamic. There's an interpersonal reality to it. And sometimes where we get lost is we get stuck on the interpersonal nature of it, and we personalize what's happening. And the it factor is really trying to pull those threads apart and say, I can be in a good relational, healthy dynamic here, but I don't have to be trapped by whatever the problem is that we're trying to solve together, whatever the issue is we're trying to solve. And so we want to set the thing apart and say, we need to focus on this thing, the it. You guys will be beautiful at this, because you're so used to doing this with problems in your organizations that you face, and by putting them on the issues list. This is the thing we need to discuss. And it's what we need to be able to do with our tough conversations, is to create the opportunity for us to work against it, which is the problem, not tug of warring with one another. So a helpful metaphor for this, I'll give a bit of an example, is oftentimes when we find ourselves in a struggle, that we're having some conflict and need to have a tough conversation, it's you on one side of a mud pit and me on the other, and we're just tug of warring back and forth, and I'm pulling as hard as I can from my perspective and from what I see and from what I understand. You're pulling as hard as you can on yours, and one of us is going to end up in the mud, and the other one is going to get their way or create the solution to the problem. And what we want to do is we want to put whatever the problem is, the real challenge, over on the other side of the mud and have both of us working together to solve it, so that we aren't getting messy and we're getting the problem solved. So here's an example. If let's say, for instance, by example, Abby and I have a regular Monday meeting that runs 90 minutes. So let's call that an L10 meeting. And for several sessions in a row, Abby comes. This is fun to do because I'm giving the example and Abby can't say anything. Abby comes rushing in late to these sessions. In the first couple of times, it's really weird because she has such high responsibility and so good sort of with time that I just sort of brush it off as to an anomaly. Well, then it kind of becomes a pattern. So me as somebody who's conflict averse, I want to avoid it and just make up excuses for Abby. That gets us nowhere. That creates more of a shit factor than an it factor. So eventually I sort of muster up the courage to acknowledge that there's a problem. And so when I bring it to Abby, I may say something like, look, the story that I make up is that, you're late to these meetings and it's not important to you. And this is creating a problem for us. And there's at first, before I speak those things, I have a tendency to personalize it. I sort of want to make Abby wrong for what's happening. And there could be something really different happening. And so what's important is that I say, look, I don't have an issue with you. I have an issue with the fact that our meetings are getting started late. We're not having enough time to get through it, and it's having an impact on our sort of dynamic and our trust or whatever. I want to name the issue and the problem, not just come directly at Abby for what she's doing wrong, right? So Abby, unpack this for us a little bit with some of the dynamics.
If you move to the next slide, Greg, and you can just click all the elements up onto this slide for us. But the piece that the shift there that Greg was making was what happens in most of our heads, because we're humans and we do this, is we go to like, Abby's lazy, Abby doesn't care, Abby is distracted by other things that are more exciting than me, Abby is fill in the blank, and I become the problem in that situation. We do this all the time. And so the difference is separating it out and saying, knowing Abby's behavior, Abby being late is it. That's the it factor. That's the problem. It's not Abby, it's her behavior, right? So it requires us to get specific to understand the it. What's the problem? And it's not the person. What's the actual problem? And it has us look at behavior, not character. So like me being late, right? It was my behavior, not who I was, that was the problem. If it's my character, there are no solves for that. Like you can't put my character on the issues list and solve that. This is why we get stuck if we make it about character and not the behavior. So getting clear about the specifics, naming the behavior. Another way to say it is actions, not attitudes. We make a lot of assumptions about attitudes. We can't see attitudes. We don't actually know, but we can see people's actions. We can see when people are late. We can see when people scowl. We can see when people sigh. So the ability to name, hey, I've noticed that this is a thing that keeps happening in your actions. Help me solve this. Like this doesn't fit. This doesn't fit with how we operate as a team. How do we solve? How do we solve for this problem? And so then it's me and you against the thing. Hey, Greg comes to me, Abby, you're late. I'm not sure what's going on. We've got this problem to solve because it's impacting our meetings. Help me solve this, right? So it's us against the problem, the it factor. So that is the heart of this. It's relational, but it doesn't have to be personal. It's removing that element and getting very specific and clear about the it factor. So that's it. That's the it factor. That's the tool. So your tool is simply the question that is, what is it? What is it? What is the actual problem? And it's not the person. What is it? What is the actual thing? And being able to get clear about that allows you to stand side by side with that individual and tackle the problem together. So that is what we want. We want you guys to go and get after it. And we also want to name this in the end here, which is the big change happens in the small change. These micro moments of choosing to ask yourself, no, wait a minute, I want it to be their character. I want it to be the way they're showing up, and filter it through this lens of, no, what is it? And those micro moments that we make those choices is when we have massive impacts within our organizations. A small tool like the factor, when practiced, makes massive change. So we appreciate.
So our challenge to you,
yeah,
our challenge to you is for you to think right now of one conversation or one relationship that you're currently having that involves a tough conversation, and get curious with it. How can you pull the problem? How can you pull the it factor out? Get on the same side of the river as the person you're solving it with, and get to a healthy solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Greg. That was fantastic. I'm so glad it's recorded. We're going to go back and revisit that. And I think that presentation is something that many of you will probably want to bring into your leadership teams and share as kind of a reset. It's such a great reminder. I just love some of the themes that I pulled out from that, was that there's a place, and even more than ever, and a very important place for recognizing the role of empathy and emotion and relationship in the work that we do. And it dovetails so beautifully with some of the work that Gina Wickman's been laying the groundwork for around the EOS life, right? Doing work you love with people you love. And at Authentic Brand, one of our values is, no surprise, authenticity. And one of the elements that we define within that value is that we speak the truth with love because we truly care, right? And when we withhold truth, we're not caring about the people that are in relationship with us in the business. And so this was such an actionable way to speak truth and with care for the relationship. So thank you, Abby and Greg. That was wonderful. That's going to be a really helpful archive in our arsenal of material. So we appreciate you. We welcome you